Welcome to the High Impact Man podcast. High impact men from across the nation sharing their stories of inspiration, encouragement, and hope.
Gosh, seek transformational relationships.
Now, what you're hearing from the culture is not right. Pick up the six, you know what I mean? But you never know who your six sometimes is.
Stop being less.
To help others become the virtuous leaders they're called to be and that our nation desperately needs.
Hello, listeners. We're back with another episode of the High Impact Man podcast. I hope you enjoyed last week's episode. We record two at a time usually, and I don't know what last week's episode would have been because Spielberg now gets them flip-flopped. So either it was the guy that we're going to record next, who is Headgear, or it was Dr. Marty McCary, which I would encourage you all to listen to. That was very interesting. At least I found it fascinating. Anyway, this is Nevin Gorky, known as I'm not known as Dial-Up. I'm known as Defib to the people in F3.
The other D.
Troy Klinger, my co-host, is the guy known as Dial-Up. That's his handsome face in the middle if you're watching this on YouTube. And I'm glad you guys are tuned in because this is a really cool, we haven't done it yet, but I know it's going to be really cool. I'm excited about talking to our guest. His name is Paul Berg. He was a U.S. Foreign Service officer, currently residing in Snacktown, USA, Hanover, Pennsylvania. And he came recommended by the nation's general, Red Baron.
Yeah.
He and I were texting back and forth about something else, and I said, "Hey, Red Baron, you got any recommendations for us for the podcast?" He goes, "Yeah, I got a guy for you." And so here we go. We got Paul Berg here.
He's the greatest guy, by the way. He's the greatest guy.
He is a great guy. We love the general. What a down-to-earth guy, too, and so accomplished and yet, approachable. Anyway, before we get started... Yeah.
Wait, we're talking about Snacktown. Is this our chance that we should give a shout-out to Snacktown? Because they've got an anniversary coming up, right?
They do. It's unfortunately the weekend that my kids are coming in to celebrate Christmas because we're all working on Christmas.
Yeah.
December 14th.
December 14th. Is that the weekend?
I don't know if that's the Saturday or not, but it's that weekend.
Whatever. All right. Yeah, that's what
Saturday
I was
is.
Trying to confirm. But yeah, so anybody up here in the Northeast, get out and join the guys at Snacktown. I think the Freedom Hammer will be up for grabs.
Freedom Hammer will be up for grabs. You could represent your region and win it.
Yeah, bring it home.
G-Money out there. Obviously,
you're listening.
Red Baron.
Yeah,
they're a great group. And Alfred, my buddy Alfred, who just celebrated a birthday recently. Anyway, yeah, thanks for bringing that up. One other thing, so you won't hear about this episode or the next one or the one last week. But anyway, we're doing our own CSOP coming up in 2 days that I have put together, and hopefully I could do most of it. Anyway, it's going to be, we're calling it the Crucible. I just throw this out there for people that may be interested in doing things like this, and just to let you know what we're up to. So anyway, we try to do about 2 CSOPs a year here in our region that are challenging. My plan is 4:30 to 7:30 in the morning beatdown. We're going to do an hour-long. First hour is going to be a MRF. I might throw a wrinkle or two in there, but we'll see. And the second hour, we usually have a Trailblazer run about 3.5 miles or so. That's going to have a little twist to it that Dial-Up's going to bring.
Maybe a little bit
further. And then the third hour is going to be an extreme horsepower workout. We call our Fridays Horsepower Fridays, where we use coupons and stuff. And I led an extreme horsepower beat down on Nantan Extreme Week. So anyway, that's what's happening. Maybe we can fill you in the next time we record. By then, it'll be like a month after the CSOP. But anyway,
and
that's what we got going on here at the F3 Susquehanna Valley. So, Paul, I'm sorry to bore you with all that stuff. I know you're not involved with this F3 stuff, but...
Too cool. I love listening to it.
Yeah, and most of our guys are F3 guys, but not all. And we got listeners that are not part of F3. And in fact, I got some ladies that I know of that listen to us very routinely every week. They listen to us. One lady in the OR, Barb Witt. Shout out to Barb. I know that you'll be hearing this at some point. Thank you for listening. So Paul, I'm going to just read his bio. It's extensive, but it's impressive. So I really need to read most of this. So he's currently an independent foreign policy consultant, was a member of the U.S. Foreign Service from 1983 to 2018. He served as Minister Counselor for Political Affairs at the U.S. Embassy in Rome from 2013 to 2017. Prior to that, he served as Senior Civilian Representative at the Regional Platform Southwest at Camp Leatherneck, Helmand Province, Afghanistan. And yeah, I'm going to ask him about that. He was promoted into the Senior Foreign Service in fall 2011 following a tour as a Deputy Chief of Mission of the U.S. Embassy in Port Moresby, Papua New Guinea, also accredited to Vanuatu and the Solomon Islands. From 2007 to April 2009, he was Deputy Director of WHA/PPC. We'll have to ask him what that is. The Western Hemisphere Bureau's Office of Policy Planning and Regional Coordination. Well, I guess that's what that is. The Western Hemisphere Bureau's Office of, I already read that. Principal Officer of the U.S. Consulate General in Medan. Hope I'm saying that right, which he reopened. During his 3 years in Medan, he was the U.S. government's point man on the insurgency in, I'm going to mess this up, but Aceh? How do you say that? Aceh, okay. And oversaw U.S. government response to the December 2004 Aceh tsunami and March 2005 Nias earthquake. In March 2007, Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice issued him a Distinguished Honor Award for his achievements in Medan, one of only 3 ever issued to officers below the senior level. He also has received 4 separate individual superior honor awards. Prior to service in Indonesia, Mr. Berg served as Planned Colombia Director at U.S. Embassy in Bogota, Colombia, 2001 to 2002. He was the Deputy Chief of Political Section at the U.S. Embassy in Hanoi, Vietnam, from 1998 to 2001. Before that, he oversaw law enforcement and political military affairs at the U.S. Embassy in Mexico City from 1994 to 1997. He also has served in Rome, Brussels, Bombay, and Washington, D.C. Mr. Berg's languages include, get ready for this, French, Italian, Arabic, Spanish, Vietnamese, Bahasa Indonesia, and Pashto. He's a 2007 graduate of the National War College in Fort McNair, Washington, D.C. with a Master's in Strategic Studies. He also has a certificate from the MIT Century 21 Seminar. He has a Juris Doctor and Bachelor of Arts degrees from the University of Wisconsin in Madison and a Master's in International Affairs from Columbia University in the city of New York. Prior to joining the Foreign Service, he was acting executive director of the International House in New York City. And before that, he was a local politician in Wisconsin. I'm going to skip ahead here. He's also a board member of the Center of Foreign Affairs and Defense Policy. In his spare time, he likes to box, grapple, hunt, bike, run, scuba dive, mountain climb, golf, read, write, cook, and collect art. All right. I hope all of you are feeling pretty low accomplished as I am right now after reading all of that. So, Paul, welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you, man. I mean, this is pretty exciting. So,
Thank you. Me too.
we talked before we were recording. Paul didn't dodge, but he almost got drafted into Vietnam. Missed it by 1 day from his birthday. So he did not serve in Vietnam, but he served as a diplomat in Vietnam. So we're going to get to talk to him about that. Started his career, as I said, in 1983. Most of you listening to this probably either weren't born yet or you're very young, which this is an extensive and impressive resume. I got to ask you this: French, Italian, Arabic, Spanish, Vietnamese, Pashto, all that stuff. That's incredible. How do you learn so many languages?
We get trained in them. We have an institute in Arlington that trains us before we go out. And to get into the Foreign Service, you have to show that you have some capacity for languages. I thought I was terrible at languages. I hated languages. I thought languages were math, and I did badly in them. And then suddenly I took the test. It's something called the Modern Language Aptitude Test. And both times I took it, I aced it. And so as time went by, I began to discover I actually like learning languages. But don't ask me to do all that stuff right now because a lot of it's out of my head. You know, it's like a lot of it, man. If you want me to speak good French, send me to Paris for a week, okay? And after
Right.
I've been there for a week and, had a good time, I'll probably come a little bit back up.
Nice. Dial-up, how many languages do you speak?
1 and 199th English, and
The one that matters.
that's right.
What's the 199th? What language is that?
Spanish.
Oh, sí, señor. Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
I can help someone find the restroom. I can order a beer. I can ask them what their birthday is, how they're doing, and what the weather's like.
Well, there you go. All the
Yeah.
things that you need to get by.
Right.
All right. So, Paul, you grew up in Wisconsin. What was life like growing up for you?
Well, I was lucky in many ways. Why? Because I was born in Milwaukee and I lived there for 7 years with my family. At that point, I think I had 4 siblings and, working class family. But it meant that I was used to the city. And then my dad, who grew up on a farm and was an introvert, I'm sorry, he's in heaven right now, but was an introvert. And he wanted to move to the country. So for like 2 long years, from 1958 to 1960, Mom and Dad had saved every penny, and every weekend we'd go out and look at some new place, let's say 30 miles from Milwaukee, something where we could buy a farm. And finally in 1960, Dad bought this, by Wisconsin standards in those days, not a big place, an 80-acre farm. He'd still work in the city, but so I could grow up in the country, which I hated at the beginning. Hated, because I thought of myself as a city boy. I'd walked as a 5-year-old boy all across the south side of Milwaukee. In those days, we didn't have the same thing as today, where you don't want to let the kids out of the house. In those days, how could my mother even stop us, even if she wanted to? We were up to 5, and eventually she came up to 7 kids. So, yeah. So growing up in both the city and the country, it's been good for me, because it means I feel at home in both places.
Was it a working farm, or did you just land that you guys used
Half
to?
and half. We had a guy who rented the land at the beginning of it, but Dad really liked farming. I mean, he was an introvert. He liked hunting. He liked fixing cars, but he liked hunting. He liked farming. So as time went by, at 80 acres is not enough to have a working farm. And even in those days, Dad had a job with the phone company. Again, a union job. He was an indoor repairman. But actually, they wound up, and us kids had to work on it, running the farm enough to make enough income to feed the kids. Huge garden. We had cows after a while. We had a horse for a while. We sold our alfalfa. We sold our silage. Yeah, that's pretty close to a working farm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Small scale, yeah.
Yeah, I've done most of the farming stuff in my life. Not
Cool.
always willingly.
Yeah. So now you ended up going to the University of Wisconsin, and you got a Juris Doctor. Is that a lawyer? Does that mean you're a lawyer?
That's a lawyer degree. That makes you a lawyer.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
did you practice as a lawyer before
I
you
never
got involved?
practiced. No,
Okay.
I had to. It's one of those things. I was a bad boy. I loved being an undergrad. When I transferred to Madison, I was really involved, and I had great teachers, and it was passionate. And I wanted to make a mark in every class, because I wanted to have good enough grades to go to law school and make friends and all that kind of good stuff. But then I actually got to law school, and I was bored out of my head. It doesn't have any passion in it. And it's like, after all these years, I still can't follow legal reasoning. I tend to explain things through politics, whatever. I can't do that. But the great thing was, the summer before law school, there was a recall election for judge in Dane County in Wisconsin, where a judge had said some things about rape that made the national press and made him very unpopular in that very liberal city. I was still liberal back then, sort of. And so there was going to be a recall election. So the sort of leader was a woman who, what I call the anointed liberal. In Dane County, it's a liberal county, so once you're sort of anointed, all the liberal people are going to vote for you or come out for you, whatever. But she was still having a difficult campaign, and I was bored. So I walked into her office, said, her name is Moria Krieger. Moria, I'm going to be your campaign manager. And she sat there and sort of interviewed me and, said, well, at least you're direct. So I did manage her campaign. She won the election a couple days into law school, so I didn't go to law school. And then I went to law school to the small section. It was like the 4th day of law school. It was my first day of law school. And I went in, and I heard the other students, like, in a blasé way, talking about this election that I'd managed. Not that anybody knew who I was or that I'd done it or anything like that. But I was sitting there thinking to myself, you people are sitting here doing gosh darn nothing. And I was like out there actually making things happen. So I was bored, and there was a guy on the county board, one of the downtown radicals, who was actually stoned and drunk half the time, but we hung around with some of the same people. He asked me if I could run his campaign, which was not going to have any opposition. And I said, sure, that'd be great. But then another one of my buddies, who was not one of those people, said, what do you mean you're going to run his campaign? That's ridiculous. He's the dumbest guy on the whole county board. Why don't you run against him? And I said, well, I guess I should run against him. So I ran against him, and one of his themes in the campaign was that I had betrayed him, which I did for good reason. I saw him in action, and he was a disaster. So I was happy to be running against him and won my own little campaign. So, being a county board member in Dane County isn't a full-time job, but But I had a great time. I was involved in all the committees. And after that point, I never went to law school. I'd study the day before the test. Somehow, which is totally irresponsible. So I managed to limp into the top half of the class. But don't ask me about, did you clerk for someone? No, I didn't clerk for someone. Were you writing for the law review? I wasn't writing for the law review. Did you do this? Did you do that? No. But I told my mother, my older brother, we were 7 kids. My older brother, the number 1, is Odin. Odin has a business degree. He's just retired. He was a administrative manager of hospitals. He'd gotten an honorable mention in the accounting test that year. He's got that kind of a head. So Mom would ask him for stock advice, business advice, and he'd give her good advice. And I said, Mom, don't ever ask me for legal advice. I'll give you terrible advice. Don't ask me for legal advice. She only did once, so I gave her good advice. Other than that, never ask me for legal advice. Don't ask me for any legal advice.
Is his picture blurry because we're kind of trying to hide his identity, or is that coming through clearer?
He's in a witness protection program. No, his quality is fine. It's just for the recording and the way it stores it. His actual recording is at
all right. Okay. All right. It looks blurry to me, but it's gonna look good to everybody else.
It'll look
all
good
right.
at the end.
Yep. All right. You're still handsome, Paul. All right. We're good.
First time anybody ever told me that.
Hey, man, we're here to encourage, inspire, and motivate, right?
Well, now that I'm older, I'm in better shape and better looking. That's true.
Well, you're a boxer and a grappler and all that stuff. You better be.
The whole boxing thing. I see, when I was a kid, I was not the sports type. I was the book reading, debate, that kind of a guy. The only physical stuff I did as a kid were a lot of bicycling and long walks. I walked through the Bronx and through Brooklyn many times, to say nothing of the farm. But the actual sports stuff, and I felt a little bit deprived. But as life went by, I gradually began to discover, when I was already too old to, do the cool sports stuff that most guys do in high school or college, I suddenly discovered that even though I'll always be terrible at the physical stuff, I kind of liked it. And so Mexico City, 93 to 96, I really got into the habit. In those days, every Saturday night, there'd be a big round of fights at the Coliseo. And I'd go to the Coliseo, sit up in the balcony just to watch the fights, which were amazing. And Mexico, it's one of the countries I've loved the most. And, I feel a great emotional bond, just feel at home in Mexico. And Mexico City culture and sport, it's a great place. So then what happened was that as the peso crisis hit, there was more crime, including people being held up in taxi cabs. So one night it happened to me, and I was like, the 2 guys were, pinning me down. I was trying to fight back, and I couldn't even lift my arms. And I realized, you know what? You don't even know how to throw a punch. I came out fine, by the way. And as always, the guys who were taking my money barely took in me because I think they liked me. Okay, they were sort of amused by me. But I know. But so I said, you know what? I'm going to go to the best boxing gym in Mexico City. We're not talking here about yuppie boxers and nothing like that. This is a real place. It's the Nuevo Jordan, which just closed a few years ago. A gritty, grubby, wonderful 3-story of brick and sweat kind of a place where Julio Cesar Chavez and a lot of the best Mexican boxers had trained. So I went there. I found the guy who was the boxing coach, an old boxer named Jacobo Ojeda. And I said, Senor Ojeda, I want you, usually in a place like Mexico, I don't know how it works other places, if you're a kid off the streets and you want to be a boxer, you don't pay for it. You don't have the money for it. But the boxing coach makes money because he's going to put you in the ring, and then, you get a percentage. But obviously at that point, I was already an older guy. I knew that wasn't, I was just a flabby diplomat who wanted to be a boxer. That's all. Learn how to box. Mm-hmm. And I said, all I want is that you treat me like a chamaco off the street. And that was the greatest thing. So I'd go there 3 times a week. He would do just like he did for the boys off the street, hit me over the head when I did something wrong, get mad at me. Mm-hmm. And I had a great time and really got in good shape and learned that I really love boxing. It's the only sport that I feel like I sort of understand when I'm watching it. Don't ask me about Tyson Paul. That was not a boxing match. Okay?
No, that was not a fight.
I agree. I was going to ask you, but I'll refrain now.
It was not a boxing match. The 3 before that, in fact, for me, when I go to a big boxing event, I usually like the matches that lead up to it. Those are the ones that are the most fun. And especially the one with the two Hispanic boxers. To me, that was a great match. Whenever I'm having a coach in the United States, like my great guy Dave Carter in DC, the Americans tend to like hit like that, but the Mexicans punch close up. So whenever I ever have an American coach, he's always telling me, no, get further away, back, like that. I'm not going to actually be any professional fight soon, although I think I could take on Jake Paul, because your 90-year-old grandmother could do that. But I was really when I told my guy in Mexico City the day before I was departing, and told him, okay, the end, it's great, blah 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 blah. He said, Pablo, if you'd been with me 6 more months, I would have put you in the ring. And that was the nicest thing I've ever heard in my life.
Yeah. That's awesome, man.
Yeah, he's a great guy. He's still alive.
Did you ever have to use those skills outside the, getting mugged again or anything?
You know what? I've explained I'm a bad individual. In our profession, we have great security agents that, give us the advice and da-da-da-da-da. And their advice is always, when somebody does that bad stuff to you, whatever it is, then you shouldn't fight back. Just give in and don't get her. And they're right, but I can't take it.
Yeah, it's
the only thing in my life that makes me get mad. I'm the least mad guy you've ever met. I'm the least mad guy. If you right now spit on me and tell me I'm a terrible human being, I won't get mad. I'll feel hurt and I'll feel like, oh, what did I do? It's like that. However, crime, on the other hand, for some reason, I can't. It's the one time in my life that I get angry and I can't control myself. Mm-hmm. And so, like in Bogota, my best friend, my Vietnamese friend, we were twice when we first got there, mugged in the street, and both times I fought back. I know you're not supposed to, but I fought back, fended them off. They didn't get anything, barely. And the second time was kind of funny because I was so happy. I defended, myself and Hua. They got 2 cheap watches, but other than that, didn't get anything. Mm-hmm. And I was sitting down by the side of the street with Hua, who's younger than me, but like my protector. And I was having like blood coming out of my forehead, and I was feeling so good, like defended myself. Blood coming in your forehead is no big deal. It's like it's superficial. And he was going out of his mind. And he's saying, we've got to get you to a hospital. We've got to get somebody to, take care of you. I said, don't worry about it. It's just blood. And what was so funny, of course, when you're in that kind of an incident, you have to write a report to the regional security officer, the very next day. So I got, in those days as the Plan Colombia coordinator, I was working with 2 fantastic women who happened to hate each other, but they were both fantastic. Ann Patterson, one of the great ambassadors of all time. She's ambassador of so many countries. And a woman named Barbara Moore, who was the DCM. And so I drafted my report. They were my 2 bosses. They were going to have to look at it. And suddenly I had these 2 ladies, powerful, diplomatic figures, coming into my little office, clucking like, your great aunt. Mostly what had happened at that time in Bogota was they'd had a gun and they, used it to hit me over the head when it down came up. And so, there was a hole in my head. So the 2 ladies, my bosses, 2 distinguished and prestigious ambassadors, were clucking over me like they were hens and looking to see the hole in my head.
Yeah. Well, it looks like you survived that, so that's great.
Yeah, maybe the bad stuff came out.
I'm gonna jump around a little bit because there's some stuff I want to get in. If I go according to the timeline, I run the risk of not getting these questions in. So what I'm going to do is ask you first: how did you end up getting involved in the foreign service? Like this is interesting to me because how does somebody do that? Do you say, "Hey, I want to go be a diplomat now"? Or I mean, how does that happen?
Yeah, and I really wish that I had an inspiring answer for you and for your listeners about how for my whole life I wanted to be. Someone who, it wasn't that way at all. I was in Madison, I transferred to Madison, and one of my buddies there, I wanted to be 2 things in life in those days. A politician, because I had learned how to do politics, how to manage campaigns. So politician, and also I'd fallen in love with New York City. So I wanted to be a New Yorker. two mutually exclusive things, but that's what I wanted. And then my buddy Joe, a little bit older guy than me, he was a Navy vet, and he said, "Hey, Paul, I just signed up for the Foreign Service test, and it's free, so you should take it too." And I said, "Sure, if it's free, I'll take it. What's the Foreign Service?" So then he explained to me it's diplomats and da-da-da. So that's the inspiring way I got into the Foreign Service was this. And it's like competitive tests, both a written and an oral and this and that. Usually don't pass the first time, but I almost did. And then second time, boom, was in. Because I've got the temperament. I've got the... to get into the Foreign Service, there's two particular things you should have. One is a broad knowledge, not a deep knowledge, a broad knowledge. So... And you have a multiple choice test for, how much you know about a million different subjects, multiple choice. And of course, if it's a broad knowledge, I can ace that. And so you do need to have a broad knowledge because as a diplomat, you're going to be talking about everything. You're going to be talking to everybody, all kinds of people. And, duh is really not a very good conversational gambit. So, and you have to write well. So then the other part of it is when they're doing the oral interviews, what they're really trying to find out is if you have the right temperament for being a diplomat. And the right temperament is a little hard to narrow that down. And if you look on the web page, it'll describe all the things you're supposed to be. But you know what I mean? They're not looking for somebody who's like nasty competitive, or they want somebody who's got the temperament that he can bring people to compromise, understand the power structures of other organizations, communicate with people well, that kind of stuff. And apparently,
that's cool.
I thought I had that.
I think, Dial-Up, I think you'd be a good diplomat. I don't know about me, but I think you'd be a good diplomat.
Give it a try. You don't know.
You're like, I got to bring in the... Yeah, I'm going to have to bring in the, the black ops a little more often and take some people out. But you'd probably be diplomatic.
I think I could do okay. I think I probably could do okay.
I think I could do it. I think
Until I got to that
diplomatic.
language test that he had to take.
Well, we've all got our strengths.
That's right.
So that's interesting. So now you started your career in Foreign Service in 1983, and you finished up in 2018. And let's see, that's 1, 2. I'm going to do this quickly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 or 8 different presidential administrations.
Yeah.
From the United States.
Your question is, does it make a difference who's in power? Yeah. And to us, this is my personal experience. To us in the field or at the department, the one thing that does make a difference, it's not what you think. It's not that now it's a Republican, it's going to be all business and war. Oh, now it's a Democrat, it's going to be human rights, and the interests of the United States are the same.
Right.
They don't change. But what does change is the personnel. I mean, of course, we're the professional personnel, but the Americans have this bizarre system where the president can appoint anybody he or she wants to be an ambassador. And so even though every new presidential candidate says, "Oh, I'm going to appoint professional people," but they never do. With each passing year, doesn't matter which party, they have more and more what we call political appointees. And sometimes
they got to reward their friends that supported them during their campaign.
And what it's like, they're all... I've had good political appointee ambassadors, and then I've had some that were not so good. But not trying to name any names. But what it's like if you get somebody who's never done diplomacy before, fine. They may be 70 years old, have money, have political connections, but they've never done diplomacy before. So it's kind of like having a junior officer first tour as your boss.
Right.
And so you have to explain everything in a way that will not show disrespect for the fact that your boss is your boss. At the same time, you have to explain to him or her things that you learned in your first tour 35 years ago, and explain them all kind of with crayons, even though these are adults. And these are, who in their own careers have maybe made a lot of money, done a lot of stuff, but stuff I couldn't do. But this is a different profession. So that's the difference, is not so much. I mean, there's some policies that obviously change, but most of the big stuff, America's interests don't change just because you elected a Democrat or a Republican. America's got same interests everywhere. It's every time. Same things that what we want. They don't really change. But you do get different personnel. So suddenly you get a different Secretary of State. Suddenly you have a different Assistant Secretary, whatever it is. And that can make a big change. And so I tend to view it more in terms of what are the new people going to be like. And it's nice when you get an administration that has people that are at least somewhat experienced with foreign policy in the political appointee positions.
Yeah, that's very diplomatically answered. You see
Well,
how I did that?
hope it's accurate. I think it's accurate. At least it is my experience. What can I say?
Sorry, it was a bad joke by Defib.
Love you.
It was a
All right,
good effort.
Yeah. Somebody out there is laughing. I could tell. All right, so I gotta get to some of these things. So one of the things I'm just currently interested in, I usually bring up something that I'm reading that I'm very curious about, and you just happened to serve in the diplomatic corps from 1998 to 2001 in Vietnam, and I'm reading the second in two book series of memoirs by a guy named Dick Thompson, codename Dynamite. Right, so he's writing about his experience as what they called a 1-0 in the MACV-SOG, whatever you call it, units. And they were, so MACV-SOG, let's see if it stands for military something advisement, something Vietnam strategic. Anyway, whatever the name stands for isn't what they did. So it was cover for all these black op operations that were being done on the other side of the wire, so to speak, in northern Vietnam and in Laos, and things that the United States would disavow and say, "Nah, we have nothing to do with this." But man, the stories that this guy has told, detailed battle descriptions of what they did and stuff, just incredible. I mean, if he is a modern day Rambo, and he's been on Jocko Willink's podcast twice. That's how I found out about him. And man, Dick Thompson, codename Dynamite, if you're listening, I want to get you on our podcast. So I'm going to try to get a hold of you. So stay tuned for that, folks, because that would be really cool. I'll give you one example. One of the missions he went on, he had his. I'm not going to tell you all the details, but he was hanging from a nylon rope from a helicopter, trying to be inserted to save another team that got shot down behind enemy lines. And the helicopter was taking fire, so it had to fly higher. And he was hanging on the end of the rope, and the tree canopy was about 20 feet below him, but the tree canopy was 150 feet from the ground. He decides to swing and jump into the tree canopy and crash through the limbs. Finally, he got fortunately hung up on one of the limbs and survived, gets down on the ground, ends up having a broken spine, but he goes on to save the team and tries to crawl out and find a guy to capture. I'm just incredible stuff that
Sounds
this
like
guy
a movie
did.
in the future coming out.
Oh, it should be. I mean, I didn't know anything about this MACV-SOG stuff until Jocko started having these guys in his podcast a couple years ago. But anyway, when you
if you don't mind, I don't have, obviously, I was there as a diplomat. I went to a lot of places. I travel all over, many experiences, many adventures, went to some of the battlefields, etc. And technically, I was the liaison between the embassy, the working level guy, between the embassy and the U.S. government has, since 1994, MIA office, Joint Remains Repatriation Office. That's, the Vietnamese and we, that was one of the three agreements that the Vietnamese had to live up to before we would agree to reestablish diplomatic relations, was full participation. So they do an incredible job, even though we're down to the last something like 1,600, 1,700 cases, and most of those are never going to be, get the remains repatriated because they're like ships that sank at sea and stuff like that. But I was in on digs for remains and heard stories. And also I would be the guy who would sort of host the visits when we'd have the U.S. veterans groups that would come out, like VFW and Vietnam veterans, would come out. Some of the veterans groups in those days didn't accept the fact that the U.S. had diplomatic relations, but some did. So that's one thing. But just a slight little pizza pie to what you were talking about before, guys coming on planes. So what I would do on Sunday mornings in Hanoi was that I had two great Vietnamese assistants, and they knew I liked going to craft villages, places like 50 miles away, whatever, where they make interesting crafts, because I buy stuff. Anyways, it would be a chance to just practice my Vietnamese without, people being able to speak English. So I'd get on my motorcycle to some village 50 miles away, whatever, that my guys had recommended to me. So one day I was off in some kind of ceramics village. I don't remember the name, not the nice one where they make nice pottery, but they said, okay, they make some kind of ceramics. Turned out it was like water pipes and stuff, so it was nothing I was going to buy. But you'll walk around, talk to people, and then eventually the old man of the village saw me and he said, come up to my place. He said in Vietnamese, and I said, sure. And then as we were walking up to his place, he motioned over the huge expanse of rice paddies off just outside of the city with the mountains beyond. And he said, you know, we shot down one of your planes there in 1960s. I think it was B-29, if I get that right. And I said, oh, you shot down one of our planes? Yeah. He said, yeah, I'll never forget that day, that night. We shot down the plane, and everybody in the village ran over to see if the guy was still alive, and he was still alive. So we put him on our shoulders, you know, take him to wherever he got taken. And he said, do you know what we were all thinking? And I said, no, what were you all thinking? We were thinking, we've never seen a man so handsome before in our lives. So I always wish I could have figured out who that guy was. No doubt he was terrified. I mean, if only he'd known that what they were thinking was, you know, maybe my daughter can date this guy sometime.
Well, that's interesting. Have you ever heard of those MacV SOG guys before? I know I'm
not familiar with it. It's now that you've mentioned it to me, I'll try to get the book and add it to the stack of stuff that I'm reading.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
It's really cool stuff. Did you, so I'm on the topic a little bit, but, and maybe you can't tell me, but did you ever, I mean, you served in so many places in the diplomatic corps. And before we went on the air, I did ask him, everybody, if he was CIA. He denies it. So he's not CIA. But did you ever have to be involved in, like, you know, okay, we know there's a black operation going on here. The guys are coming through, you know, our sort of, you know, embassy, that kind of stuff?
Never, you know, as hands-on as, so I don't have great stories about that. It's mostly stuff that I did whatever I needed to do on my side. And you know, it's not that I can't talk about it, or I probably can't. It's that I don't remember. Sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, that's okay. Cool. All right. So now another thing I want to get to, and we're going to have more time talking more about more stuff, but I wanted to ask you about Afghanistan, because you served there.
Yeah, 1 year.
Let me see if I get this right.
1 year.
You were 1 year.
2012 to 2013. So I was like August to August.
Yeah. So what, I mean, so your experience there and your service there, I mean, what did you think about how we handled everything there?
Yeah, mine is a working level view. I mean, yes, I read the papers. Yes, I know sort of we were doing this and we were doing that. By the way, I'm just finishing a book. I've got it down here. Great book that a friend of mine recommended, an Indian friend, called Pashtuns, by an Indian author who's written a lot on Pakistan, named Tilak Devashir. And would you believe it? I'm just getting to where he's writing about the American period in Afghanistan and, you know, why we got out and everything. And it's like up until now, the thing about the author of that book, great writer, knows Pakistan well, but Indians hate Pakistan. Pakistan is the source of all evil. And so even though this guy is very intelligent and very well informed, but he's still, you know, you can see that he's got that bias. And obviously part of what he's saying in his great readable book, which I highly recommend, is that, you know, the United States made a mistake dealing with Pakistan, blah, 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 blah. That's just how Indians feel. And
I mean, Afghanistan?
So 1 year there, it was a good year in terms of it was a period when, at least in Helmand province in southwest, in southwest, it wasn't, there was the breach of the border there was a combined British, American, and Afghan base. And the Taliban managed to get in. 2 people were killed. My great friend, General Gorganis, ultimately wound up being the sacrificial lamb for what happened there, even though they'd broken through on the British side for lack of security, adequate security. But it wasn't a period of enormous fighting. It was a relatively pacifistic period, a peaceful period. One thing, the day that Joe pulled us all out and didn't let anybody know, and did sometimes, I don't want to sit around and bore my friends with writing about, here's what I think about foreign policy. But when something like that comes up, I've got reactions because I was there. And so I want to share them to my friends. And I wrote up a page about my reactions at the time. And one of the things that I had to say then, and it's still true now, is that I remember very well reading the CIA and whatever intercepts of what Taliban people were saying. And what they're always saying was the same thing, even back then. We're just going to wait out the Americans because the Americans are an impatient people. Eventually they'll pull out and we'll take over. And of course, that's exactly what happened. That's exactly what happened. And it's one of the things I've always said, midway through my career, I started in my head a mental discipline of trying to understand the unique qualities, the unique characteristics of the American people, not the ones about how we're the ugly Americans or about how we're the greatest people who ever lived, but actual characteristics of the Americans, and not good ones, bad ones, just characteristics like, long nose, short nose, whatever. And one of them is that the Americans are an impatient people with a short attention span. And that's a horrible thing for foreign policy, because actually
Yeah.
a lot of stuff you have to be committed to hundreds of years. Our East Asian friends are people who think in terms of hundreds of years. Our Western European friends are people who sometimes think that way. But Americans think that like 2 years is a really long time. How come things didn't get solved in 2 years? We've been there for 2 years. 20 years in Afghanistan. 20 years? You mean we didn't solve anything? Well, we should have been committed to staying there for a couple hundred years. And it wasn't actually that expensive. And we weren't losing many lives anymore because we weren't in combat. And besides, we've stayed now ever since World War II in Korea, Japan, Okinawa, in Germany, in England, in Italy. And those countries have had peace because we've been there and we've benefited from it. We've had trade. They're our allies. So how come a non-advanced country like Afghanistan doesn't deserve to have us sitting there so that they have peace and so that Taliban doesn't take over and plunge them back into the dark ages? The Japanese can have that. The Germans can have that. Not the Afghans, because the Afghans are just too different from us or whatever it was. So I felt terrible myself when it happened. Yes, I know that Trump was negotiating our way out. And I personally didn't like that either, for what my little opinion is worth. Didn't like it. But at least Trump is a negotiator. And Trump is somebody who, could pull the rug out on the last minute, because he's often done that in negotiations in life. In Joe's case, he just said goodbye and left people everything we'd done to crumble. But most importantly, left so many Afghans like, okay, you're going to be murdered tonight or whatever. And without any, apparently no care about what happened. So that's one thing about Afghanistan. The year I was there, like I said, I was lucky because I was senior enough that I could travel to where we had State Department people at the forward operating bases. And, and that was interesting to me. One thing of the many things to remember that I remember about being in Afghanistan was one of the things I'm best at is like human relations with people right there down the alley, whoever I meet. That's something I do well. Go native. I'm great in the field. I hate being in Washington, but I'm great in the field and da 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 da. And in Afghanistan, we were under formal directions that we were not to have any contacts with the Taliban. And of course, one of the things about the Taliban is that in a place like Helmand, and half the farmers maybe are Taliban today, and then the farmers tomorrow, and they're around. And if we could talk to them, then we'd have better rapport. We could do. And in fact, I think, and this book I've been reading makes the point too, that one of the mistakes we made early on was not including the Taliban in the formal power sharing that was taking place in Kabul. We should have done that, and we should.
That's interesting.
I wasn't around at the time, so but mainly, I've always felt that for me on the ground personally, the worst thing was for me, it was great being on a military base. I've always had lots of Marines as friends. And after being at Camp Leatherneck, I've got like 1,000 Marines as friends. I love them. They're great. And I feel, by the way, a certain community with Marines. All American diplomats do, because we have Marine guards at our embassies. So diplomat blood and Marine blood is commingled in places like Nairobi, in places like Beirut, in places like Kabul, where diplomats and Marine guards got killed at the same time. So our blood is mixed. So we have a certain close relationship with the Marines. And I felt even more, sort of working closely with the Marines at Camp Leatherneck in Southwest, is that there's two things about Marines that they share with us diplomats, even though it seems unlikely. One is that they're mission oriented and really mission oriented. And so are we in our very different style, in a very different way. And the other one is that they're task oriented. And that's another thing, that we too are that way. We have formal plans at the State Department that look beautiful that we never follow because there's no planning in diplomacy. It's whatever happens tomorrow morning.
Right.
So those are a few impressions of my time in Afghanistan. I love my Afghan friends, my Pashtun friends. They're great people. And I only wish I would have had the chance to get to know Taliban people in the street.
Yeah. So a follow-up question on that is, you talked about our short attention spans and that kind of thing.
We do.
And the way we pulled out. I know that, like China, for instance, I think they're known for having 100-year, patience. They don't have to win this year or next year. They'll win in the future. So the way we pulled out of Afghanistan and the things that you described, do you think, what's your opinion? You are a foreign policy consultant. So what is your opinion on if the way we did that in any way embolden people like Putin to go into Ukraine and to be launching missiles at Israel? I mean, do you think it played a role in that?
I mean, I've done some thinking about that, talking to colleagues and whatever, and I can't give you a brilliant opinion on it, so I won't. But I have an old story, though. One of the great things about being an old guy is you got stories.
Stories.
By the way, money can be wasted. You can get more money again, but you can't get new stories. It's the greatest thing about getting older, especially if you've done a lot of stuff. You got stories.
Yes.
So this whole thing about the American short attention span and what you were just describing, the story, I've told it a million times, but it's so true. So I get to Hanoi, and big part of my portfolio is external relations. And of course, the only country that matters to Vietnam is China, which they hate and fear and copy because they think that'll, a long story, I'll get on that some other time. People, the foreign ministry, they weren't against seeing an American, only that, they weren't as communicative as they could have been. And I need to write cables analyzing from many sources what's happening. And China's the most important country, but they have think tanks. So early in my time in Hanoi, I go to the China Studies Institute, headed by an old Vietnamese guy, old Dr. Quy. And Dr. Quy is a very opinionated fellow, and he studied in Beijing for 10 years. His Chinese is perfect. He was one of the drafters of the 16-character characterization of the relationship between Vietnam and China, which is a big deal to those countries. And of course, he frickin' hates China. China, and he's saying to me, how come you Americans aren't doing enough about China? And he said, you Americans, you're only thinking about the short term. We have to think about the long term. I said, well, Dr. Quy, I don't think that's quite true. I'm sure that our people at PACOM have 50-year plans, 100-year plans for the Pacific. And he said, that's just what I mean. You're only thinking about the short term. So to people in East Asia, 100 years is the short term. Right. Even a guy like Xi in China, he's thinking about what happened 2,000 years ago, what's going to happen in 1,000 years. That's the ocean, the cognitive ocean that people are in East Asia. And the Americans have the shortest attention span in the world. I've never, ever discovered another people with attention spans as short as ours. Boom.
Yeah,
yesterday.
Right. Do you think that's partially because of the 24-hour news cycle and all these news channels and
No, the 24-hour news cycle is a result, not the cause.
Good point.
Sure, it'd be nice if there would be, thoughtful analysts like in the old days of network radio. Even then, they wanted to be up to the minute. The Americans want that. I remember when 24-hour news radio started to be a thing in the late 60s. Suddenly, you got all these Americans who were like, I'm listening to that. And now I want to know what's going on. I have it in my car all the time. I'm going, okay, now you know what's going on in the world. Now, does that mean you're not going to go home and have a beer for dinner or what? It's like, for me, let's have music.
Yeah. Very nice.
Instant gratification for us.
Yeah, absolutely. That's us, man, right? Fast service, fast food, fast everything.
Fast cars.
Yeah, the Americans have a short attention
fast
span,
cars.
the shortest.
Yeah.
And the most impatient people. Absolutely impatient. It's one of those things. Again, this isn't actually a political comment, but I was struck at the beginning of the COVID crisis that suddenly there was this whole thing. I mean, Trump was promising there was going to be treatment, there was going to be vaccination, and the Americans were all upset. It's like, you said it's going to be in 4 months, 4 months before we get a treatment for this thing. And I'm thinking, 4 months. I mean, when I was a boy, it took, it's considered a huge step that we had the Salk vaccine for polio. And it took years, and then it was like 15 years later, Sabin came up with the Sabin vaccine that you could swallow. And our doctor in Littletown had us all get it after church, go to the high school and get it. 10 years, 15 years, and even then, American advances in medicine were the wonder of the world.
Yeah.
But now, it's like 4 months before we get this thing cured and taken care of. That's Americans. That's Americans. Right. I mean, and you see that the results, and of course, I'm happy that they came up with treatment quickly. I'm not, trying to be a jerk, but it's so American that people would feel that way, and of course, one of the results is that none of the vaccines were quite perfect, but the Americans wanted them. We have to have them right now, and what is anybody going to say except yes, it's the Americans. I'm one too.
Good point.
I'm one too.
Yeah. So, since you're on that topic, tell me about, you've been in so many countries, experienced so much, and from a unique perspective, you're in these countries. Because, if you go as a tourist, you're going to see one thing. If you're out there as a diplomat, and like you said, you're going to different villages in Vietnam, different things like that.
Living with people.
Living with people, talking with people, and that kind of stuff. Of all the places you've been, do you have a favorite or a place that had the most impact on you?
Well, let's say that I only have one place that I really hated, disgusted, awful, terrible place nobody should go to.
Wait, can I guess it?
Yeah.
Washington, D.C.
How did you guess? Nobody should go there. Terrible place. Even now, I have really good friends in D.C. Of course, I moved to Hanover, Pennsylvania because it's less than 2 hours away and yet a totally different cognitive world. So I'm so fortunate so I can go down there, see friends, have them come up. I've got some really good friends coming up tomorrow, retired Foreign Service people. We're going to have a great time. But D.C., no. But as it is, I liked all the countries I served in, everyone. But the ones I liked very best are the ones where people had a temperament that's like mine. Because I'm a little different from other Americans, and I growing up as an oddball. I'm a combination of both assertive and all of that, but also oversensitive inside, da-da-da-da-da. So what that meant was that I just thought that I was a strange person. But then, back before I joined the Foreign Service, 1 year, because I was been elected to this office, I had a little bit of money in my pockets. So I wanted to travel for Christmas vacation to a place as far from the United States as I could. And one of my best buddies had been working with Catholic Relief Services in Calcutta. So I, in those days before internet, I called him. I said, Tim, can I come out and stay with you for a month? Yeah, absolutely. So I was amazed. I got to my first foreign country, India. And my first foreign country, India, people all have my temperament. They're all like me. They're all people who are like assertive, talkative, social, but also deeply oversensitive inside and da-da. I often disagree with Indian foreign policy, but I always understand it. I always understand. Another country that I felt exactly the same way about, that I loved and felt at home emotionally, was Mexico. Mexico is a country that's just right for my temperament. Yeah. I liked Indonesia a lot. The Italians and I seem to take to each other. So, who doesn't like Italy? I liked Italy. I liked them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. It reminds me a little bit of a New Yorker, right? Assertive and all that, but a little sensitive. Am I off on that?
Well, here's the thing. In 1974, I was lucky enough in Wisconsin to be chosen for a program they still have called the University of Wisconsin UN Summer Seminar, where you study in Wisconsin for a month in the summer, then you go out to New York and you stay at a dorm and study the UN for a month and a half. That was my first time ever in New York City. I never had money to travel, and I was smack dab in love with New York City. And I realized every book that I had ever read was about New York. And I felt totally at home in New York City, totally at home, and couldn't wait to get back. So from then on, every vacation, Christmas or summer, I would either a driver car or I hitchhiked a couple times just to get to New York City to spend a couple weeks there and enjoy it. And that's the reason that I did a graduate degree at Columbia University, because at that point I wanted to be a New Yorker, even though I also had already been accepted by the Foreign Service, blah, blah, blah. And so for my entire life, until about 10 or 15 years ago, I was in an unrequited love affair with that sexy, hard woman in New York City. She's sexy. She's, in your face. She's
Yeah.
tough. She, da 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 da. And so I'd come to New York. Sometimes she'd remember me. Sometimes she'd be sweet to me. Other times she didn't even know who I was, and she was running around with all the rich people, and didn't care at all about me. But doesn't matter. I was always in love with that woman in New York City, and an unrequited love often, but unrequited loves can be the strongest. And then suddenly, I want to say 12 years ago, 14, whatever it was, I'd be going up, if I was doing a DC tour, driving up to see friends in New York for the weekend, whatever. And suddenly I'd come back. I loved seeing my friends, but I come back feeling like, what's missing? And then I realized what had happened. I'd fallen out of love with New York City. So for all those years, I was deeply in love. And because I'm a fanatical walker, I walked over every inch of that city. Yes, I mean the dangerous areas of Brooklyn. Yes, I mean, and then because I was at International House, a great place, I took people on all-day walking tours of New York City. So I would take people, like groups of like 25, 30 students, mixed American and foreign, with the idea that you've always heard about the South Bronx. Let's walk through it. I knew the South Bronx. And we'd stop and have lunch at a Puerto Rican place. We'd see this neighborhood. I'd describe the history of that neighborhood, whatever, all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I mean, you mentioned New York. New York is a city that I took to from the start. It's just that I've fallen out of love with her. I've fallen out of love. And so I don't mean to. She's such a hard, tough lady that I could insult her behind her back, and I don't think she'd even notice. You know what I'm saying?
Dial up. There's your love story, buddy.
With other people you break up with, you don't want to talk about them because, it's sort of insensitive and hurtful. In the case of my love affair with New York City, she just isn't interesting to me anymore. She just isn't interesting. And this happens.
Paul, you can only have a one-way love affair for so long before, you're finally going to give up. So Big Apple has a hole.
I agree. I went back there with a young buddy, about 6 months ago, and I still know like good ethnic places to eat. We had a good time. We had a really good time.
Oh, that's cool. You're the greatest guest. I could ask you anything. I could ask you what your favorite color is, and you're going to give me an engaging story. So I could talk to you forever. I got to get down to Snacktown just to have dinner with you, brother.
You're welcome anytime. I'm the cook. I like to cook around here. Great produce here. Yeah. You can buy anytime. Well, I mean, when it comes to color, the issue here is that, like a lot of other men, blue is like the natural color, or black. But when I was coming back from Papua New Guinea, I usually, on home leave, I would rent a car, drive coast to coast, and have a great time. And I was going to do that at Papua New Guinea, but two things happened. I had a buddy there who was the American head of a big oil company. They were exploiting LNG and blah, blah, blah. And we hit it off. So he told me he was going to have a custom Camaro made. And then suddenly I got to the point where I was trying to work out my home leave plans and rent a car. And I realized, you know what? Renting a car for 2 months in the United States, driving from California to D.C., is going to cost me about the third of the cost of buying a Camaro. Why don't I buy a Camaro? So I got on the USAA buyer's service, and they found me a place in the LA area, and I bought my first Camaro SS. And I may be out of love with New York, but I have to say I was like sex mad love with my first Camaro.
What year was that first Camaro?
She was 2011, and it was like first owner, and with dark blue with black stripes, SS, everything, and so that was an amazing car, and it was great having a Camaro in Italy because the Italian men love cars, and they know all about cars. And and they'd never seen a Camaro because in those days they weren't selling Camaros. The only Camaros you would have found other than mine in Italy were on the American military bases. Other than that, you wouldn't see them. So I would get to a truck stop or whatever, and I would come out and I'd see like a herd of Italian men all looking at my car, because it's just so cool to have a Camaro. Finally, I had her for quite some time, and then she went to heaven. And that was a sad date for me. But fortunately, and here's where the color part comes in, I think dark blue, okay? But my buddy Steve owns a muscle car repair shop called Wet Dreams up in Abbottstown. He'd located, because of a death in the family, he knew that my blue Camaro was getting ready to go to heaven. And so he found a guy who was like one of his in-laws, who had just unfortunately died, had bought a 2010 original Bumblebee Camaro and never used it. Only like 33,000 miles. So I paid a remarkably small amount, and I bought myself my current Camaro, which is a yellow Bumblebee. And yellow ain't my color, but everywhere I go, I mean, if I go to a gas station tomorrow, somebody, often women, it's not just men, often women are going to tell me, "That's a really cool car, mister." And of course, I have to agree. Yes, thank you. It's a really cool car. What can I say? And the thing that happened, okay, and I've been still so this is all color, okay? Because you say color, fine.
I told you I could ask you about your favorite color and give me an engaging
Why
story.
not?
I knew
Why
it.
not? So I just came back about 4 weeks ago from a cross-country trip. I hadn't done a cross-country trip since 2020, which was 2020. May of 2020, it was the Paul Berg Liberate Your Friends from COVID prison. So I visited friends from coast to coast and said, "Get the heck out of your house and and stop being a prisoner." And that was great. And so there's a little university in California where I know a young guy who's one of the professors there, and he even pays me a small honorarium to come out and give a talk on foreign policy to the students. It's in the class. Very nice. Little place called Soka University. So last year I was going to drive out for my talk, but my buddy in New Delhi's son was getting married, so I had to go to his wedding. So I flew out to California, flew back, flew to India, flew back. And I said, this year, I'll drive out no matter what. So I did. So I had a great time driving out. The way I-70 is laid out is that I have really good friends every day, meaning I can spend every night, first Dayton, really good buddy and his wife there. Then Kansas City, a really good buddy and his wife, prosecutor. Then Superior, Colorado, a couple that were, well, blah, blah, blah. Okay, I can go coast to coast on I-70, a little bit less on I-10 or I-20, just seeing friends of Paul Berg every night. And I
Very nice.
missed a few of them. So here we are. We're in Colorado. I'm in Colorado. But me and my Camaro, she and I. And I like to have music, and I have satellite radio, and I have different kinds of music. But at that point, I was playing 40s music, some old big band. And I play it as loudly as I can. And so I'm pulling into this gas station in the bright sunlight, and you know what it is when you're putting gas in your car, you got to concentrate because every gas station has a different set of what you have to do. Do you put in your zip code? Do you not put in your... So I don't pay any attention, but I hear a small voice behind me saying, "Big band," and I'm ignoring the small voice. Then finally, I've got the gas going in. I've done all the click, 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 look through the sun, make sure that I'm not pressing the reject this card button, whatever. Finally, and then the guy says, "What big band were you listening to?" And I said, "I don't know, it's satellite radio." And he said, "Well, here's the thing. Usually when I see a guy in a car like yours, I hear boom, boom, boom coming out of the window. But you were playing a big band." And I had to say, well, I play boom, boom, boom sometimes. So then I started to debate with some of my friends, like, is it more cool to be playing like old music out of my radio at the top of my lungs? Or is it better to have boom, boom, boom coming out? I like boom, boom, boom. I like Meshuggah. I like Asking Alexander. I like, a lot of the heavy metal stuff. So I'm experimenting with that. If you hear boom, boom, boom coming, from somewhere around Hanover, it's my car. Yellow.
All right, you and the yellow Camaro.
Yellow Camaro.
All right, well, thank you for that. I basically have four more questions for you. The first one is, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about what did you do in Aceh that got you the Distinguished Honor Award?
Well, there's a number of different things in Aceh, but the main thing was the tsunami happened on my watch. And I was the only American. It's a long story. There had been, I'll make it short, there had been a consulate in Medan all the way till the Baker years at the State Department were years where the State Department didn't have any money. James Baker thought the Cold War was over. He thought he was going to be the candidate for president for the Republicans, did not want to be accused of raising budgets. Therefore, the State Department had to close consulates all over the world. We had a couple years with no intake of new officers because we had no money. And so one of the consulates they closed in 1995 was Medan, even though it's like the third largest city in Indonesia, really important. So ever since then, the embassy we'd managed to hold on to the residence of the consul general. And they put officers there with the idea, work hard, and we'll try to get this thing reopened, which requires congressional approval. And Madeleine Albright at one point announced we were going to do it. But then it never happened. But I'm an adventurer. So, and I wanted that. So the ambassador there, when I came free, really wanted me to be in that job. But I was working out of my house. There were offices, like with a few local employees in whatever, in the living room of the residence. So I worked for 3 years in an office in my own house. And that was great. And I had my Vietnamese guy and his wife and boys were born back then. It was a wonderful time. And one day I had a tiny little swimming pool in the backyard, like half broken. I never used it. It goes back, 1,000 years. And it was a Sunday morning. And I worked every day because I was working out of my own house and I was like an adventurer trying to get things open, Work was often social, but it still was work. And suddenly I hear something going click, 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 click. And I'm looking and I'm thinking this might be an earthquake. And I realize the click, click, click is like the keys in the closet door going back and forth.
Oh, yeah.
And then, I hear the guards coming to take Wong on the boys out. And then I see from my little swimming pool, a tsunami of water comes out and hits the door. Okay. So I knew that there had been not just an earthquake where I was, but probably something bigger, like epicenter, somewhere further away. And as the day progressed, of course, it turned out it was Aceh and was going to be horrible. So that meant that for months and months and months, everything I did was Aceh, meaning coordinating shipments, NGOs, visiting figures, going up there myself, writing reports on what was going on up there. Just a lot of stuff. And even as things got better, even before the tsunami, the main reason for reopening the consulate in Medan was because of the continuing on and off insurgency in Aceh. So I was supposed to be a listening post for that. So I knew a lot of Achenese and worked hard to get up there. So, yeah, so it was both of those two things. And finally, leveraging them to get congressional approval of formally reopening a consulate, which happened.
Yeah. Well, good work. Thank you for that work. Another question. I got two questions I asked all our guests, but they're my last two. So I got one before that, and that is, if I were to give you the Grand Poobah hat right now, what would you do to solve the Russia-Ukraine war?
Well, thank you. Great question. If you were to give me the by the way, I often tell people what I'm going to do when I become emperor of the universe. I have a whole set of proposals.
All right.
And
not just the world.
Well, I'm asking
ready.
people to support me in the emperor of the universe primaries too. I want to get their support, but I haven't named a committee yet or anything like that. But I do want to be the emperor of the universe. And there's all kinds of things that are going to happen then. But in terms of Russia, Ukraine, I don't have a good answer for you. However, there's two things that I have to say about it. One thing I've learned in my life that the Americans constantly forget, is that if you have local people fighting for their independence and freedom, those local people almost always win. We should have learned that from the Vietnam War. That, in fact, several books that came out made that point, that we as foreign troops were viewed as illegitimate, not just by the North, but eventually by people in the South. And that's going to be true anywhere that foreign troops of any kind, not just Americans, start taking over a war. And so, but when it's just the local people, if you give them support, which we're doing, then eventually I think they're going to win if we keep our attention on it. So that's one thing. I don't know. I guess if I were the Grand Poobah of the universe, I would just kick Putin out.
Yeah. Here's my question, and maybe this is naive, and I know Putin's a bad guy, but why does Russia have to be our enemy? I mean, I don't think they've got this ideological. Yeah, well, I don't think ideologically, I don't think they're like, I'm going to spread communism throughout the earth anymore. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but why don't we just bring them into part of NATO, make a new thing, and just say, hey, we're going to be friends, man. We're gonna trade with each other. Yeah, right. Yeah. No. Mm-hmm. All right. Cool. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I don't know enough about Putin, and all that stuff. But I know that I know Patton wanted to go in there. He didn't want to end. He didn't want to stop in Germany. He knew that Russia was going to be Soviet Union was going to be the next. Do we have? Here's a question for you. I just thought of another one. Do we, as a nation, do we need to have an enemy? Yeah. 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 Right. Yeah. 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 I never thought of that question before talking to you. I just thought of it just right, when I asked you, but I think it's kind of a interesting question. Yeah. I think from a political standpoint, we almost do, right? Two parties, they use something, right? I mean, they use Afghanistan as a political tool against each other, all that stuff. So that always happens. No, I don't want people to get the impression that yeah, right. Yep. I don't want people out there to think I'm some kind of, I love everybody liberal guy. It's a good thing I haven't been president or Grand Poobah, because I probably would have dropped a lot more bombs than have been dropped. But I'm glad that that hasn't happened so far. But I just thought of these questions I'm talking to you, but just interesting things to think about. All right, Dial-Up, do you have any other questions for him before I ask him the questions we always ask?
No, nothing I can think of, but just fascinating discussion. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh,
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, could be
You
fascinating
better hurry up. They're
discussion.
getting older. Yeah.
Do
No,
they
that's
record?
okay. I would go to that.
Yeah, do they record those, Paul, that you can watch them after the fact? Yeah, it'd be great.
Yeah, and they'll text me or let me know when the date is, because I'll try to get there, because that'd be fascinating to me. And then we could go out to dinner and really talk. We'll get Red Baron to come. Yeah. Oh, that's right. You're a cook.
Pierogies, right?
Yeah. Who did Trump pick for Secretary of State? Was that Rubio? Okay. All right. Right. Getz and some other people I think already stepped down as a nominee.
He did.
Yeah.
He withdrew his name.
Yeah. I think there's like 3 people that resigned, something like that. I just saw it on the news. That's today. So what's today? November 20th. So that's the date we're recording this, y'all.
He did nominate a new attorney general. Yeah. She is from Florida. She's former U.S. Attorney General in Florida. Her name is Pam Bondi.
There you go. Oh, I've heard of her.
Breaking news.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think she was involved in the last election, something. Anyway, whatever. All right. So 2 questions for you, brother, before we get you out of here. One, we ask everybody this, all our guests. The first one is, if you were to pick somebody, could be ancient past, somebody now, whatever, that you would say is your inspiration, your hero, somebody you look up to, who would that be? Very nice. All right. The last thing is, this is your chance to speak to the men of America. What's your message for the men of America? What would you like to tell the guys in America? Yeah.
Well said.
Very nice. Your friend and ours, General Jodis, Ralph Jodis, he, when we had him on here, he said, do the right thing in the right way for the right reason at the right time. I think I'm getting that right.
Pretty close.
Similar to what you just said. Yeah, similar to what you just said. So to have the moral clarity, you got to have something to stand on. You better have the right foundation. And for us, it's our Christian faith. And one thing I forgot to do is, before we go on the air, we usually pray with our guests, and we forgot to do that. It's Dial-Up's job to remind me, because I'm forgetful.
I forgot tonight. Sorry, man.
I know. But anyway, since we forgot to do it beforehand, I'd like to pray for you right now, so we could, a good way to end this. So, Father, we thank you for Paul and for his service. Lord, to you first, and then to our nation, and the way he's faithfully served for so many years, Father. And he's still doing that. He's still going out and engaging people, and just trying to have that moral clarity and do the right thing, and in the right way for the right people, Lord. And so we thank you so much for that. I pray you bless him and his family, and I'd really like to meet him someday, Lord. So I pray you get us together. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
All right, Paul.
Yeah. Thanks so much for coming on and spending time with us tonight.
Yeah. The engaging, handsome, retired diplomat, Paul Berg, ladies and gentlemen.
Woo-hoo.
God bless you, brother.
All right. Take care, brother.
All right. See you later.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. I would like to thank our guests for joining us and sharing their story of becoming a high-impact man. More information and resources can be found at highimpactman.com. If you like this podcast, please consider following us on our social media pages or email us at him@highimpactman.com. That is HIM@highimpactman.com. The High Impact Man podcast has a new episode every week, and you can find them on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and Google Podcast platforms. Have a great week, everyone.